y'all doing marvelous as always. Welcome back to another special session. And in this one, we're gonna go ahead and talk about my workout routine. So why don't y'all come on and join me, you know what I'm saying, as I cut up this watermelon right here and, talk about what I do, you know what I'm saying, throughout the week. My workout routine, it just depends on the days and how they fall. Some of y'all may have heard of what's called the bro split, which is basically like, that split that a lot of fitness people do. A lot of people that work out, like they'll do a bro split, which is basically where you do, you combine certain groups together and you pick those groups and, put them on a certain day. So like maybe, for example, Monday might be chest and triceps, Tuesday being back and biceps, Wednesday maybe legs, Thursday maybe rest or just cardio, stuff like that. And sometimes maybe even instead of chest and tris or back and bis, maybe it'll be chest and back on one day and then just arms, bis and tris on another day. Essentially, a lot of what I do, there's a lot of bro split incorporated with that. As I do my bro split, depending on how the days fall, it just basically, that just kind of dictates how my week is gonna go. So typically I may do like chest and back on Monday, just as an example, right? And with chest and back, the reason I do that split is because, those are two big muscle groups. And mind you, I actually have a video about this. I have a short essentially about doing chest and back. And I did mention in the short that, if you're not exactly conditioned for it, maybe you should try something like chest and tris instead, or maybe back and bis, or you can even do, the individual groups by themselves. Some people do that as well. So instead of combining a muscle group together, or two muscle groups together, I should say, some people would do just one muscle group. So maybe you just can't have a chest day, right? If you're more comfortable with that, then that's cool. Ultimately, you want to do what's comfortable for you. You can do a chest day and then back day, leg day, arms, you know what I'm saying? Like you can do that too. Combining muscle groups that go together is probably the best and most effective way for you to get the results you're looking for. So like chest and triceps, right? The reason why chest and triceps go well together is because, any exercise that requires you to do push movements, you activate both of those muscle groups. So like a bench press, for example, right? When you do bench press, that's primarily a chest exercise, but you do activate your tricep as somewhat of a secondary, or maybe even a, additional primary, as I might put it. Because, it's hard to say secondary sometimes when you go to do push-ups or when you go to do bench press, and you not only feel it in your chest, but you feel soreness in your triceps, like the next day or maybe following that night whenever you worked out, so sometimes I look at it as an additional primary as opposed to just a secondary. Not everything is always a constant, but just to give you a little bit of a clue as to like what my weeks look like, I'll say Monday may be more like chest and triceps or chest and back. I always try to hit chest no matter what on a Monday. And the reason I do that is so that sometime later on in the week, I can do chest a second day. So the big muscle groups, for me, I try to work twice a week. Okay, so your legs are also a big muscle group, right? Legs I always do by themselves. I'll usually try to do that on a Tuesday and then again on a Friday. Or maybe like usually always on a Tuesday I try to do legs for sure, right? That's a definite on Tuesday is legs. And if I don't hit it on Friday, then maybe I'll hit it Saturday, or Sunday. Just depends on how everything goes. With just legs, I can easily get an hour or so workout with legs. You got your glutes, you got your hip abductors, your hip adductors, then you have your quadriceps, your thighs, and then you have your hamstrings, right? Backside of your legs, and then you got your calves. You have a lot of muscle groups, like a lot of different pieces to your legs. So it's easy, at least for me anyway, to get an hour's worth of leg workouts. And, that's a combination of different, weights types. So that being cables, machines, even barbells, dumbbells, things like that. So that's my Monday and Tuesday, right? Monday is either chest and back or chest and triceps. Tuesday will be legs for sure, usually. Wednesday, normally that's gonna be, I'll start doing maybe chest and tris or chest and back, depending on what I did Monday. So if I've done chest and back Monday, then chest and tris come Wednesday. That's my second day of the week doing chest. And then I incorporate arms too, because I don't want to leave those out. Even though you incorporate arm workouts in certain exercises, like, bench press is a chest workout, but you incorporate triceps, you still want to try to dedicate a day or so. You want to dedicate a session to your arms. Okay, so you want to make sure you get that in so you're not neglecting anything, you're not lacking there. Then Thursday comes around, maybe that'll be back and buys, right? So, back and buys go well together, as chest and tries do, because with back and buys, a lot of the exercises you do with those muscle groups are pulling. So when you do, rows, when you do lat pull downs or any kind of pull downs, when you do pull-ups, right? Especially underhanded pull-ups, which I believe are called chin-ups, right? People I guess they still call them chin-ups, these days. But, either way, any kind of pulling movements, you're gonna activate your bicep. So back and buys pair really well together, and again, your back being a big muscle group, I try to work out those muscle groups twice a week, right? The big muscle groups, I try to work out twice a week. Sometimes my days might fall on if I'm doing chest and back, a lot. Like if I do chest and back twice a week, then of course I have to have a day that's dedicated for just arms, because obviously, they're getting left out if I don't do arms. If I'm just doing chest and back and not chest and tries or back and buys some other, time of the week, then I'm neglecting my arms, and I don't want to do that either. And then of course, as far as cardio goes, right? Because, depending on your goals, of course, we don't want to leave that out. So some of y'all, if you follow me on Instagram, you see just about every Saturday, especially when the summertime comes around, where I live, I'll go out to the beach and I do a beach run, right? So usually my beach runs, they essentially consist of about 5Ks pretty much, at least, according to what my watch says. Whenever I set the workout, I don't actually set it for a 5K. It just so happens that every time I run, I'll have run enough to have completed a 5K. So I usually run about 3 or so miles, and that's usually, a combination. Sometimes it's a combination of running and walking. They call it the Galloway method, where you run a certain, amount of time, and then you'll walk a certain amount of time and then do it again. You keep your heart rate up while you're walking, but you don't let it get to a point where your heart rate sinks too low to where, you're not getting your maximum VO2 max, your max level of oxygen, basically. You want to make sure that you get anywhere between, when you're doing cardio especially, you want to get anywhere between 70 to 80% of your VO2 max. So just as an example, and I'll put it up, on the screen too. As an example, right? So I'm 34 years of age. The reason why that's important is because you first want to figure out your max heart rate. Okay, that's the first thing you need in order to figure out your VO2 max. So your max heart rate is 220 minus your age. So 220 minus 34 for me, I think it's 186. That's the highest my heart rate should be at any given time. 70 to 80% of that's what you want to take. That's how you get your VO2 max. You take your max heart rate and multiply it by 0.70 or 0.80, right? You get a good range of what your VO2 max should be. For my VO2 max, 70% of that is about 130, 131, and 80% of that is up in the 140s. So as long as my heart rate, when I go on the runs, just as an example, in this scenario, when I go out on the beach runs or I do cardio of any kind, like in order for my heart rate not to drop too low, I have to make sure that my heart rate stays above 130. Especially if I'm not running actively, because obviously, when you're running, your heart rate, it goes up. When you stop to take a walk, if you do the Galloway method, like I do sometimes, when you stop to walk, you just want to monitor your heart rate, make sure it doesn't get below 70% of your max. I walk enough to make sure that, or just at enough of a pace to make sure that my VO2 max doesn't drop below 70%. For cardio, for me, I love to run, but I do actually, because of my military service, I do have, unfortunately, ailments. Heel spur in the left foot, plantar fasciitis in my right. I have tendonitis in my right knee, and then I get shin splints real bad, depending on the shoes I wear. And that actually is going to be another future special session where I'm going to go over my sneaker collection. If I'm not running though, chances are I'm going to be in the gym doing the Stairmaster, or I might go to the gym that has a punching bag in it. I think I've shared that in one of my videos, like one of my whiteboard sessions, and at the very end is me hitting the speed bag. So hitting the punching bag, for some of y'all may know that that's a very good form of cardio. So I'll do 5 minutes on the punching bag and then 5 minutes on the speed bag. And I'll just alternate like that until about 45 minutes to an hour has passed by. Because for me, I've talked about this also, but for most people, you want to try to get 150 minutes per week of cardio. You can either do 150 minutes of moderate, intense cardio, or you can do 75 minutes if your cardio is of the vigorous type. That's my cardio, and usually what I'll try to do is sometimes I'll end up doing 2 a days, like not cardio twice a day, but like I might hit the gym twice a day. First in the morning and then again in the afternoon. I'll pick a couple days out the week because there's still my Saturday beach run, so I'm getting cardio there too. So that just means about 1 or 2 other days in the week, I gotta make sure I get up in the morning and then do my cardio. Or if it's a rest day for me throughout the week, I can just do cardio on my rest day, right? I mean, obviously you're not really resting if you're doing cardio, but it's a rest away from weightlifting. And that's probably some of the best ways that you can maximize your efforts. Man, take a look at this watermelon right here. Yo, this joint is nice. I ain't even gonna hold you. I started visiting my local farmer's market, and the guy that works there, he'll pick your watermelon out for you, and he's really good too. Sometimes going in the store, it can be hit or miss whether or not a watermelon is very sweet. And when you get watermelon, I already know about the ones that you're supposed to pick out as far as like what to look for. They say look for that golden spot, or sometimes look for like the webbing or little scratches and stuff like that. But the guy at the farmer's market, he did tell me some other things that you want to look out for is like when you take both hands and you put it on a watermelon. If you put your hand on one side and then like hit it, because of course you want a watermelon to be hollow. When you hit the watermelon, if you could feel like somewhat of a vibration on your other hand, then it's typically a good watermelon as well. That's something I didn't really know, but I'll definitely look out for in the future. Should I get my own watermelon and I can't make my way over to them. That's really good. But since I've pretty much finished cutting my watermelon, one of the things I wanted to go over with those workout routines is what the routines entail. So like if I'm doing chest and back, or I'll just go muscle group by muscle group this time. If I'm doing chest, what I usually like to start with is the dumbbell bench press. Now dumbbells, right? I work more with dumbbells in the past couple years because I had a shoulder injury back in 2023, and it took a long time for my shoulder to get, and that's typically with most shoulder injuries. Unfortunately, it's one of the easiest muscle groups to hurt. Because essentially what happens is like your shoulder is one of the most free rotating, it's one of the most free moving body parts. So it becomes easy to hurt if you're not careful. And I had to take a little bit of time off the gym, but I also had to sort of repurpose what it is that I've been doing that requires a little bit of shoulder. So bench press, of course, when you do chest, it activates your triceps as well, but you also activate some of your delts. On the long bar, I'll do my light stuff, but on the dumbbells, that's where my heavier stuff comes in. What I try to do is 4 exercises per muscle group, and the second exercise I'll go do, if I can get into it, is the flies. Okay, whether they're on the bench laying down, or they're standing, or they're sitting down on the machine and doing flies, right? I try to get those, the ones where you're seated and you're doing these flies right here, those ones always usually get taken up, because with those machines, some of you may know, not only can you do flies, but you can also set the handles here and go out like this. So some people will use those machines to work out their rear delts, because that's what that targets. When you go out here like this, it targets your rear delts. So some people do that as well. The machine sort of doubles. So if I can't get on that to do flies, then what I'll usually do is I'll just get the freestanding cable machines, and then I'll just bend over and sort of at the waist a little bit, and just kind of bend forward, and I'll bring the cables down here. I'll do one of those ones, because those I can usually get. Number 3, I try to get a machine where it's just it's just a bench press, right? You just put your back against the pad or whatever, and then you set the weights right, and you just put your hands on the handles and you just push out. That's usually what I try to do. Or if it's one of the machines where you actually grab plates and stack them, I'll do those too. So it just depends on which one is available at that moment. But the fourth exercise I try to do for chest, and I try to finish this out, right, as sort of like a little, like a chest killer in a sense, so to speak, is some push-ups. Can't get any more original than that, right? Push-ups is probably one of the best things that you can do to end your chest workout after you've already killed it with weights, be it cables, dumbbells, or, barbells, free weights, whatever. You know what I'm saying? After all that resistance, one of the best ways to kill your chest is doing push-ups. Never neglect push-ups. They always work. Okay, it's classic. They exist. They've been around a long time. They're there for a reason. So, I always try to do push-ups after I'm done. So for back, very first thing I try to do with back is deadlifts. Okay, the Romanian deadlifts. I always want to, I start that out so that I can sort of open up my back routine. Getting the lower back exercise in. So that way I can just kind of, get that out the way, and then focus on the upper and the middle parts. With the Romanian deadlifts, not only do you work your lower back, but you also do hit your hamstrings if you're doing them right. I'll move on to rows and pull downs, and usually not in any particular order. So my second exercise, let's say I'm gonna go with pull-ups, okay? So pull-ups, and I try to do each, no matter what grip it is. Like what I normally do is I try to do, I'll do just regular wide grip pull-ups, and then I'll do hammer grip, and then I'll do underhand or close grip, however whatever you call it. However, sometimes the, bars get set up. So for those 3 different modifications, what I do is 6 sets of pull-ups, 1 set for each modification. And then I'll do as many as I can. I don't really have a count anymore because, with pull-ups, I kind of stopped trying to count how many I can do, unless I'm trying to gauge how many I can do at one time. But if I'm in the gym working out, doing sets of pull-ups, I don't count those. I just do as many as I can until I reach failure, and then I'll just take a little bit of a break before I go into my next modification. Rows or lat pull-downs. Now the lat pull-downs, the grip I like using the most is the grip where I can go like this. If I'm doing rows, I like to do the rows that have the little, I guess it's like a little V-bar or what have you, where your hands are closer together and you just pull back. My fourth exercise for back is gonna be either like just some other variation of rows usually. So maybe I'll do barbell rows, bent over barbell rows as you see right here. Or maybe I haven't recorded myself doing this one yet, but there's people that'll lay on a bench, right? They'll set the bench to an incline and they'll just put their stomach against it, and they'll grab dumbbells and they'll just do like this. Y'all have probably seen that before too. Maybe some people do it. You can do one arm or you can do both arms. And some people even alternate. So I do triceps next. So for triceps, very first exercise I love doing is the skull crushes. Okay, skull crushes are great. They hit all 3 heads of your triceps. So some of y'all may know, some of y'all don't, but there's 3 heads to your triceps and only 2 to your biceps. So, when people have the big arms and they flex and stuff like that, people a lot of times see the bicep, but they don't pay much attention to the tricep. That's what really makes your arm, look huge. Skull crushes hit all 3 heads, right, of your tricep. I'll always do the curl bar, right? And sometimes I'll do it laying straight down, or what I love to do is actually incline it a little bit and do it that way. Because what I started to notice was if I'm laying straight down and doing tricep skull crushes, my shoulder hurts a little bit. So elevate myself, to an incline on the bench is easier for my shoulder. Second one, I'll go over to the cables next. I'll go and do the ropes. Basically, it's another form of tricep extensions, over the head. This one also hits all 3 heads as well. It's just a different variation of extensions. And now this one here, now that's my favorite. I usually do that number 3. And then number 4, right, to kill off triceps, what I usually do is dips. I always try to do those. Now what I like to do is obviously the ones where I'm using my own body weight and trying to push myself up. But at the gyms I go to, unfortunately, oftentimes if I'm hitting a tricep, if I'm doing a session on triceps, sometimes what will happen is they'll get taken up. And if they're taken up, then what I gotta look for is this machine right here. You're not really using your own body weight, which is what I prefer, okay? But it still works, right? Dips and dips. Next muscle group I should say I have is biceps. So with biceps, the first thing I'll start out with is, it just depends on what's available, but there's so much you can do with biceps, it gets kind of overwhelming sometimes to choose exercises. So what I like to do is, if I can, I'll start off with the preacher curls usually. The second exercise that I like to try to get in is concentration curls. Concentration curls are these right here. So with these concentration curls, you essentially, you're just sitting there and you're focusing, like you're isolating your biceps, like, even more so than you already are. You're not using your leg at all to try to help you. You're just simply using it for support, right? Your leg is just there to support you. And I like to do that usually until failure. Most of and it depends on what I'm doing. If I'm trying to put on muscle, then obviously my sets will usually be the same. I try to do 4 sets of whatever exercise, whether I'm putting on mass or trying to cut. I'll do 4 sets. How many reps though, that's determinant on what it is that I'm looking to do, what goals I'm looking to attain. So if it's to put on mass, then I'm doing 4 sets of like say 10, and then all the way down to like 5 maybe for the last set. That's how heavy the weight should be for me, for me to put on mass. But if I'm trying to cut, then I'm of course looking to try to get into the 20s range, depending, right? Not always the case, but I'll do like 4 sets of maybe 15 to 20, and then try to keep it above 10 as I go further in the sets. That's what works for me in the cutting phase. And even in the cutting phase, sometimes instead of 4 sets, I'll go 5, right? Because that means I'm really trying to focus in on something to get the cuts I'm looking for. After that, what I'll try to do is I try to go find another machine. There is one that I use. It's you sit down and you got the pads up here, so you put your arms on the pads, you grab the handles, and then you just go like this, okay? My last one, usually I try to do a bicep exercise that gets some forearm work in, because when you work biceps, you typically do implement forearms anyway, but there are exercises that help concentrate a little bit more on forearm. Those being either the reverse bicep curls, which is where you'll take a curl bar, right? And this is a tough one. With this one, you don't really want to go heavy because you really can injure yourself here. You can hurt yourself. You can end up injuring your wrist. Anything can happen with this one. You can do reverse bicep curls where you grab a curl bar and it's just like a bicep curl, except you're doing it in reverse. Your hands are over. Another exercise, if I'm not doing that one to help incorporate my forearms, I'm doing the hammer curls. So some of y'all may know what that is too. Here's a video of that one. So with the hammer curls, and this is one of me sitting down, but most people do hammer curls standing up. You can do either way, it works for you, whatever works for you, Some other bicep exercises I like to do, just depending on what it is I can find. Here's another one as an alternative. It's a classic move, You can stand and use a curl bar and do bicep curls, or you can also, sit down and do dumbbells, right? You just sit down and then you just slowly, lower the dumbbells and then, go ahead and curl up. These are classic exercises. Shoulders, okay? Now shoulders is for me basically just kind of all over the place, and what I mean by that is it's not exactly structured. What I do try to do is work out my front delts first. What I'm doing is like your typical raises, right? Your front lateral raises where you can grab a barbell if you want to, but most people find it easier to work with dumbbells or even a plate. Like some people, including myself, will grab a 45-pound plate and then we'll just go just like this, right? You sit there and you just come up, hold for like a 1 count, come back down slowly, right? And then go up. Another typical shoulder exercises I like to do is shoulder press, right? Is where you just sit down or you can stand up and you just press up, right? With dumbbells or with, machines if you're sitting down. For those of y'all that don't know, your deltoids, right? That's, your shoulders, and your traps is also part of your shoulders too. These are your traps up here. So anterior would be the front, posterior is your rear, and then you have your medial, okay? Or otherwise known as front, middle, rear. Front, medial, rear. Either way, however you want to look at it. For the medial deltoids, typical thing I like to do, and most people do, is, going out to the sides, okay? So posterior there's a few things I like to do with that one. I actually love working the posterior delts, because one thing I forgot to mention is when you do back, certain back exercises actually engage your delts anyway. They engage your shoulders, like rows, even pull-ups, pull downs. When you do rows and you go to pull back, you're implementing that rear delt anyway. And same thing for when you're doing pull downs. When you do pull downs, you're implementing that rear delt anyway, as well as some of your traps. The most common exercise for traps is the shrugs, right? You know, grab onto either some dumbbells or I'll grab a bar and just shrug. That's one of the easiest things you can do for traps. What I try to do is, like, if I'm doing the front deltoids, I try to do about 10 sets. That gets me about 10 minutes in right there. And then I do the same thing with the lateral raises, right? Lateral raises, I'll do about 10 sets of whatever, right? It's usually the failure, okay, if I'm being honest. You know, and those 10 sets will give me another 10 minutes, right? Usually, roughly. Okay, so I'm already about 20 or so minutes in with the shoulder workout just on front and medial delts alone. But the posterior though, there's a few different exercises that I do for the posterior delts, so I don't have to do up to 10 sets. I can do my usual 4 or 5. So the first one, you can either bend over or you can lay on a bench, right? Incline, and you'll just grab a bar or some dumbbells and you just go just like this. Okay, you'll simply go just like this. You're not engaging anything else except your posterior deltoids. If you're standing up at a cable machine, right, you can grab, you know, one of the attachments where you grab just one arm, you set it all the way down here, you know, as low as you can, maybe not all the way to the ground, but you set it all the way low, as like maybe as low as your shin, and then you go just like this. So that's about 2 exercises right there, cable, dumbbells, and I actually already mentioned one earlier with the chest. So with the flies, right, that machine actually doubles. You can set the bars, you know, all the way in instead of them being all the way out for you to do flies. You can set them all the way in so that your start position is here, and then you just engage out, right? That works your rear delts as well. So that's 3. Some of y'all may know what upright rows are, and you can do this with dumbbells. You can do it with a curl bar, and the curl bar might be the easiest way because, you know, you can just hold on to one bar and go just like this here. All right, y'all. So I had to, you know, go ahead and clean up real quick so I can go ahead and take a seat. The last muscle group that I wanted to go over, right, when I say for last, is of course legs. So there's about to be a plethora of leg exercises put up in this video. Some of them I've already made shorts out of anyway, so you can catch them in my shorts if you haven't already. There's a leg day video in my shorts session. My favorite day to work out actually is legs, to be honest with you, because with legs, I'm able to do so much. You know, I can easily get an hour in, sometimes an hour and 10 minutes if, you know, depending on what it is I'm doing. And if there's machines that I couldn't get to, because, you know, a lot of other people love leg day as well. You know, the saying, you know, never skip leg day really resonates with a lot of people, believe it or not. So first exercise I like to start off with, if I can, is the leg press. It's a good exercise for me to you know, get my blood flowing, you know what I'm saying? It helps me to put your back up against the bench or up against the, you know, the back, the padding of the seat. And, you know, you get to just use your legs for a minute. Depending on your foot placement, you could actually be working out your glutes. You could actually be working out your groin. And with the leg press, I've gotten to the point where I can go, you know, heavier than, you know, I used to. You know, I hit a milestone back in 2023 where I was able to leg press nearly 1,000 pounds. So, you know, that's why I love leg press so much. You know, it's, if I want to go do something that's like real heavy, you know, not to the point where I'm hurting myself, of course, but if I'm doing something real heavy, I can start off with leg press, because I know leg press, I can just stack on the weight, you know, up to a certain point, and I can just press, you know, versus like, say, doing squats or something like that where you're standing and, you know, you want to be careful of how much weight you squat because of risk of injury. But that's going to lead me into my second exercise, actually. If I can get to it, if there's a free squat rack, but I try to do squats. If I can't get to a squat rack, then I go do the Smith machine. Now, the Smith machine, still a good workout, right? But obviously with the Smith machine, it's assisted. It's more of an assisted squat. Outside of the quads, you know, you hit glutes as well, you know. You may even hit your You may even hit inner thighs a little bit. And you're definitely also hitting some of your lower back because of, the movements, you going down, you're engaging your core. I like to do the squat because the regular unassisted squat, because it allows me to be able to focus on stabilizing myself so that I can complete the exercise. You're exerting a little bit more energy, which of course means, you're getting more of a workout. I'll say recently I did see this one guy, he just stacked on plates. You know what I'm saying? He just kept stacking them on, and he wasn't really squatting all the way. He wasn't like performing a full squat, right? There was no real range of movement. And I looked over, I didn't say anything, but the guy that was at the squat rack next to him had said something. He wasn't mean about it or anything. He was like, hey, look, just so you know, man, you want to try to, do a squat that gets you your full range of motion. And that's going to be hard for you to do with all that weight. He made sure to tell the guy, he was like, you can do whatever you want, man. I won't say nothing else to you. I just don't want you to hurt yourself. So, I had to kind of commend him for that one, because, that absolutely is what can happen when you squat a lot of weight like that. You can absolutely hurt yourself. After the squat, it's going to be more of an isolation type. I'll move on to working the hamstrings next as part of my legs. So what I'll do is I'll either, depending on what's available, lay down on my stomach on one of those machines and do hamstring curls, or I will do the machine where you're sitting down and your legs are out, right? Your legs are out already like this, and then you're curling down. So I'll either do one of those two depending on what's available. And if they're both available, then what I'll do is I'll split between the two. Like I'll do 4 sets of the one where you lie down and do curls, and then I'll do 4 sets or 5 sets of the one that you sit down and you just curl. Now if one of those happens to not be available, whichever one I can get, I'll just simply double the sets. So instead of doing 4, I'll do 8. Instead of doing 5, I'll do 10 on whatever one I was able to get, and then I just move on to the next thing, which actually is gonna lead me into the next thing. That's gonna be working my glutes. So with glutes, I like to isolate that. I like to either do glute kickbacks, or I'll do the hip thrusts. All right. Hip thrusts, typically women's favorite exercise, but men can do them too. All right. It doesn't make you gay. You feel me? You know what I'm saying? There's some men out there that do think that, and that's definitely not the case. You can ask any woman, they'll tell you the same thing. Maybe that'll change your mind. Unfortunately, the hip thrusts, this is thanks to a lot of y'all women out there, unfortunately. But that's okay. All right. No hate. Hip thrusts tend to be taken up a lot. So what I do is I'll instead go to the glute kickbacks. Because the glute kickbacks, for some reason, they're like outlawed. Like, some women use them. Some of y'all like to use them. But most of y'all gravitate towards the hip thrusts. What may get you more of a workout is the hip thrust where you have a long bar, right? Where you have the Olympic bar and you have plates on each side. And you're doing hip thrusts that way. You have your back up maybe on a bench or something like that, and you got your barbell, and then you're just doing hip thrusts that way too. Almost done with the legs now at this point. What I'll do is I'll focus on my calves, and then I'll focus on the hip abductors and the adductors. So what I try to do is, and there's no particular order for that. So after I'm done with glutes, I'll move on either to calves or the hips. And now for the calves, I like to do either standing calf raises, or what I like to do is, if that's not available, because a lot of people do gravitate to that one too. If that's not available, then what I like to do is, as an alternative, you go like this, okay? You just take your feet and you go like that up against the pads. But there is one more. You actually have to grab plates and put weight plates on this one. Between 3 different calf raises exercises, depending on whichever one is available, that's usually the one I'm gonna go for. Do about 4 to 5 sets of those. And because they're calves, right? Calves are smaller muscle groups. So because they're calves, I try to do up in the 20s. Last but not least, we have the hips. Abductors and adductors. The hip abductors, right? For those of y'all that don't know, abduct means to kidnap or take away, right? So the hip abductors, that's the exercise where you sit down and your hips go out like this, okay? Your hips, they come out. The hip adductors, right? ADD, that's gonna be the one that You start out here and you're going to come in. That's gonna end my leg workout. That is my workout routine, y'all. I think I've went over just about everything that I pretty much do, right? From the Saturday beach runs to, the other different types of cardio I can do. Boxing, right? Hitting a heavy bag and a speed bag. Then there's the stair stepper, I did mention that. I don't really like to do the elliptical too much. For me, it's kind of boring. For others, you may find it, you may find it well. I like to do cardio that burns the most calories, and typically running in a stair stepper would do that for me, especially if I'm doing that for about 45 minutes to an hour, at a good moderate pace. Hitting the heavy bag and the speed bag, probably one of the quicker ways, even more so than running, to burn calories and to burn more calories. I also have HIIT, right? I got, HIIT workouts in my shorts. I have 3 rounds of HIIT. I can easily get a 45-minute workout in with HIIT, and I can easily also burn between 400 to 500 calories. Because HIIT is, it's high intensity. You're not taking as much of a rest, and you're almost moving right on to the next thing once your time of rest is up. That's pretty much gonna cover that though. I will see y'all on the next one. Thank y'all for tuning in with me. Hope y'all enjoyed watching me cut watermelon and talk about my routines. Should do stuff like that more. We'll see. Who knows? But y'all take care.